story, but bear with me.
It started as an 18th century puzzle. Is there a route around the city which crosses each of these 7 bridges only once? Finding the solution is much more difficult than it looks. It was eventually solved by the great mathematician Leonhard Euler, who in 1735 proved that it wasn't possible. There couldn't be a route that didn't cross at least one bridge twice.
He solved the problem by making a conceptual leap. He realised you don't really care what the distances are between these bridges. What really matters is how the bridges are connected together. This is a problem of a new sort of geometry of position, a problem of topology.
Many of us use topology every day. Virtually all metro maps the world over are drawn on topological principles. You don't care how far the stations are from each other, but how they're connected. There isn't a metro in Kaliningrad, but there is in the nearest other Russian city, St. Petersburg.
The topology's pretty easy on this map. It's the Russian I'm having difficulty with. Can you tell me which...
What's the problem?
Want to know what station this one was?
Oh, I had it the wrong way round even.
Although topology had its origins in the bridges of Königsberg, it was in the hands of Poincaré that the subject evolved into a powerful new way of looking at shape. Some people refer to topology as bendy geometry, because in topology, 2 shapes are the same if you can bend or morph one into another without cutting it. So, for example, if I take a football or rugby ball, topologically they're the same, because one can be morphed into the other. Similarly, a bagel and a teacup are the same, because one can be morphed into the other. Even very complicated shapes can be unwrapped to become much simpler from a topological point of view. But there's no way to continuously deform a bagel to morph it into a ball. The hole in the middle makes these shapes topologically different. Poincaré knew all the possible 2-dimensional topological surfaces. But in 1904, he came up with a topological problem he just couldn't solve.
If you've got a flat, 2-dimensional universe, then Poincaré worked out all the possible shapes you could wrap that universe up into. It could be a ball, or a bagel with 1 hole, 2 holes, or more holes in. But we live in a 3-dimensional universe, so what are the possible shapes that our universe could be?
That question became known as the Poincaré conjecture. It was finally solved in 2002 here in St. Petersburg by a Russian mathematician called Grisha Perelman. His proof is very difficult to understand, even for mathematicians. Perelman solved the problem by linking it to a completely different area of mathematics. To understand the shapes, he looked instead at the dynamics of the way things can flow over the shape, which led to a description of all the possible ways that 3-dimensional space can be wrapped up in higher dimensions. I wondered if the man himself could help in unravelling the intricacies of his proof. But I've been told that finding Perelman is almost as difficult as understanding the solution.
The classic stereotype of a mathematician is a mad, eccentric scientist, but I think that's a little bit unfair. Most of my colleagues are perfectly normal. Well, reasonably.
But when it comes to Perelman, there's no doubt he is a very strange character. He's received prizes and offers of professorships from distinguished universities in the West, but he's turned them all down. Recently, he seems to have given up mathematics completely and retreated to live as a semi-recluse in this very modest housing estate with his mum. He refuses to talk to the media, but I thought he might just talk to me as a fellow mathematician. I was wrong.
Well, it's interesting. I think he's actually turned off his buzzer. Probably too many media have actually been buzzing it, and I tried a neighbour. That one rang, but his doesn't ring at all. In some sense, I think that it's his papers, his mathematics, which speaks for itself in a way. I don't really need to meet the mathematician. And in this age of big brother and big money, I think there's something rather noble about the fact that he gets his kick out of proving theorems and not winning prizes.
One mathematician would certainly have applauded. For solving any of his 23 problems, David Hilbert offered no prize or reward beyond the admiration of other mathematicians. When he sketched out the problems in Paris in 1900, Hilbert himself was already a mathematical star. And it was in Göttingen in northern Germany that he really shone.
He was by far the most charismatic mathematician of his age. It's clear that everybody that knew him thought that he was absolutely wonderful. He studied number theory and brought everything together that was there, and then within a year or so he left that completely and revolutionized the theory of integral equations. It's always change and always something new, and there's hardly anybody who is so flexible and so varied in his approach as Hilbert was.
His work is still talked about today, and his name has become attached to many mathematical terms. Mathematicians still use the Hilbert space, the Hilbert classification, the Hilbert inequality, and several Hilbert theorems. But it was his early work on equations that marked him out as a mathematician thinking in new ways. Hilbert showed that although there are infinitely many equations, there are ways to divide them up so that they are built out of just a finite set, like a set of building blocks. The most striking element of Hilbert's proof was that he couldn't actually construct this finite set. He just proved it must exist.
Somebody criticised this as theology and not mathematics, but really they'd missed the point. What Hilbert was doing here was creating a new style of mathematics, a more abstract approach to the subject. You could still prove something existed, even though you couldn't construct it explicitly.
It's like saying, I know there has to be a way to get from Göttingen to St. Petersburg, even though I can't tell you how to actually get there. As well as challenging mathematical orthodoxies, Hilbert was also happy to knock the formal hierarchies that existed in the university system in Germany at the time. Other professors were quite shocked to see Hilbert out bicycling and drinking with his students.
He liked very much parties.
Yeah?
Yes.
Party animal?
Yes.
Well, that's my kind of mathematician.
He loved very much dancing with young women. He liked very much to flirt.
Really? Most mathematicians I know are not the biggest of flirts.
Yet this lifestyle went hand in hand with an absolute commitment to maths.
Hilbert was, of course, somebody who thought that everybody who has a mathematical skill, a penguin, a woman, a man, or black, white, or yellow, it doesn't matter. He should do mathematics,
Right,
and
yeah.
he should be admired.
The mathematics speaks for itself in a way. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter which.
When you're a penguin.
Yes, if you are a penguin, it's
Yeah.
also.
If you can prove the Riemann hypothesis, we really don't mind whether you're a penguin.
Mathematics was for Hilbert the universal language.
Yeah, yeah.
Hilbert believed that this language was powerful enough to unlock all the truths of mathematics, a belief he expounded in a radio interview he gave on the future of maths on the 8th of September 1930.
Für uns gibt es kein Ignorabimus.
In it, he had no doubt that all his 23 problems would soon be solved, and that mathematics would finally be put on unshakable logical foundations.
There are absolutely no unsolvable problems, he declared, a belief that's been held by mathematicians since the time of the ancient Greeks. He ended with his clarion call: we must know, we will know.
Wir müssen wissen, wir werden wissen.
Unfortunately for him, the very day before, in a scientific lecture that was not considered worthy of broadcast, another mathematician would shatter Hilbert's dream and put uncertainty at the heart of mathematics. The man responsible for destroying Hilbert's belief was an Austrian mathematician, Kurt Gödel. And it all started here, Vienna. Even his admirers, and there are a great many, admit that Kurt Gödel was a little odd.
As a child, he was bright, sickly, and very strange. He couldn't stop asking questions, so much so that his family called him Herr Warum, Mr. Why.
Gödel lived in Vienna in the 1920s and 1930s, between the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and its annexation by the Nazis. It was a strange, chaotic and exciting time to be in the city. Gödel studied mathematics at Vienna University, but he spent most of his time in the cafes, the internet chat rooms of their time, where amongst games of backgammon and billiards, the real intellectual excitement was taking place. Particularly amongst a highly influential group of philosophers and scientists called the Vienna Circle. In their discussions, Kurt Gödel would come up with an idea that would revolutionise mathematics. He'd set himself a difficult mathematical test. He wanted to solve Hilbert's second problem and find a logical foundation for all mathematics. But what he came up with surprised even him. All his efforts in mathematical logic not only couldn't provide the guarantee Hilbert wanted, instead, he proved the opposite.
Got it. It's called the incompleteness theorem. Gödel proved that within any logical system for mathematics, there will be statements about numbers which are true, but which you cannot prove.
He starts with the statement, "This statement cannot be proved." This is not a mathematical statement yet, but by using a clever code based on prime numbers, Gödel could change this statement into a pure statement of arithmetic. Now, such statements must either be true or false. Hold on to your logical hats as we explore the possibilities. If the statement is false, that means the statement could be proved, which means it would be true, and that's a contradiction. So that means the statement must be true. In other words, here is a mathematical statement that is true, but can't be proved.
Miles.
Gödel's proof led to a crisis in mathematics. What if the problem you're working on, the Goldbach conjecture, say, or the Riemann hypothesis, would turn out to be true but unprovable? It led to a crisis for Gödel too. In the autumn of 1934, he suffered the first of what became a series of breakdowns and spent time in a sanatorium. He was saved by the love of a good woman. Adele Nimbersky was a dancer in a local nightclub. She kept Gödel alive. One day, she and Gödel were walking down these very steps. Suddenly, he was attacked by Nazi thugs. Gödel himself wasn't Jewish, but many of his friends in the Vienna Circle were. Adele came to his rescue, but it was only a temporary reprieve for Gödel and for maths. All across Austria and Germany, mathematics was about to die. In the new German Empire in the late 1930s, there weren't colourful balloons flying over the universities, but swastikas. The Nazis passed a law allowing the removal of any civil servant who wasn't Aryan. Academics were civil servants in Germany then and now. Mathematicians suffered more than most. 144 in Germany would lose their jobs. 14 were driven to suicide or died in concentration camps. But one brilliant mathematician stayed on. David Hilbert helped arrange for some of his brightest students to flee, and he spoke out for a while about the dismissal of his Jewish colleagues. But soon, he too became silent.
It's not clear why he didn't flee himself, or at least protest a little bit more. He did fall ill towards the end of his life, so maybe he just didn't have the energy. All around him, mathematicians and scientists were fleeing the Nazi regime, until it was only Hilbert left to witness the destruction of one of the greatest mathematical centres of all time.
David Hilbert died in 1943. Only 10 people attended the funeral of the most famous mathematician of his time. The dominance of Europe, the centre for world maths for 500 years, was over. It was time for the mathematical baton to be handed to the new world. Time, in fact, for this place. The Institute for Advanced Study had been set up in Princeton in